If you haven't been following it, the Populist Act is this incredibly ambitious 13-title legislative package. It's essentially designed to upgrade America's operating system by unstacking concentrated power and returning that capacity to the public. Today, we're focusing on how Title IV applies to housing, aiming to unstack a system rigged against everyday families.
To really wrap our heads around this, we have to stop looking at the housing crisis as some sudden natural disaster. It's a system failure. It was built brick by brick through severe underbuilding, decades of neglecting our public housing, and speculative financial interests just buying up entire neighborhoods. Throw in algorithmic rent coordination and weak routes to ownership, and you get a system that treats a basic human need like a Wall Street asset class.
Now, to be fair here, Congress did enact a really crucial patch back in July 2026 with the 21st Century Road to Housing Act. And because that act successfully addressed key issues, the redundant parts were actually stripped out of the Populist Act. We can look at the Road Act as a great starting point, a real accomplishment. But what remains in the Populist Act is a distinct, complete overhaul that pushes two major areas further. Here is our quick agenda for this system reset. People before portfolios, rebuilding public housing, supply, ownership and rural, making the market fairer, financing the build-out, and finally, housing of the future. Starting right off with Section 1, People before portfolios, reining in large housing investment groups. And this is where we see our first massive difference between the two pieces of legislation. The Road Act tried to address corporate ownership, but it set a pretty generous 350-home threshold. The Populist Act basically says, nope, that's way too high. It functions on this simple belief. No person should own more single-family homes than they can count on their fingers. So it defines excessive housing stock at just 10 single-family homes. Cross that limit and you immediately lose crucial tax benefits and face much stronger antitrust oversight. But here's the real kicker, the enforcement mechanism. It isn't just a slap on the wrist, it's a massive $50,000 annual surtax on every single excessive home an investor owns above that 10-home threshold. The goal isn't to collect a new tax. It's explicitly designed to force giant portfolios to divest down to a reasonable size before 2030, getting those homes back on the market for ordinary families.
Next up, Section 2, Rebuilding Public Housing, the Save Section 9 campaign.
Now, here is our second major divergence from the Road Act. The Road Act actually expanded the rental assistance demonstration, or RAD model, which often uses private financing structures to convert public housing into Section 8 assistance. The Populist Act places a moratorium on further RAD conversions through 2028. Why? Because this legislation heavily favors preserving direct public ownership over creeping privatization, and it requires study to make sure tenants are actually protected. So the core promise here is pretty bold. America can build public housing again, and they are putting immense funding behind it. We're talking $100 billion over 4 years to rehabilitate and modernize existing units, plus another $60 billion for brand new construction. Crucially, it entirely repeals the restrictive Faircloth cap. That was a law that arbitrarily capped the number of public housing units in America. That freeze is finally over. Moving on to Section 3, Supply, Ownership, and Rural, Building Abundance Across America.
You know, housing abundance basically comes down to supply. And to get that supply, we have to rethink how we build. The Act aggressively rewards pro-housing reforms near transit to knock down old exclusionary barriers. We're talking about real incentives to reduce parking minimums, allow by-right housing approvals, shrink minimum lot sizes, and push up height limits so communities can actually grow.
Now, while the bill pushes giant portfolios back, it actively helps ordinary families step in through the neighborhood homes credit. In a lot of areas, the cost to fix up a home is actually higher than the mortgage an ordinary buyer can qualify for. This credit is designed to close that exact gap. It simplifies financing so homes can be built or restored specifically for owner-occupants. And of course, because this is a truly national system reset, it authorizes dedicated long-term preservation funding for rural housing. Plus, it provides specific support for farm workers. These are the people who sustain our food system, so ensuring they have safe, stable housing is crucial. All right, Section 4, Making the Market Fairer, Market Safeguards for Housing Access. These safeguards are all about stopping immediate systemic harms. The big one here is an outright ban on landlords using algorithmic software and pooled market data to coordinate rent prices. No more acting like a digital cartel. It also strengthens the appraisal reconsideration process to fight subjective bias, and it protects Housing First programs from punitive systems that try to attach behavioral strings to basic shelter.
Plus, the Act rewires federal housing finance. It restricts preferential federal home loan bank advances exclusively to mission-driven housing. That means this public credit only goes to owner-occupied housing, nonprofits, cooperatives, community land trusts, and public housing authorities. It effectively cuts off cheap capital for speculative investors.
Okay, Section 5, Financing the Build-Out, connecting Titles 4, 6, and 8. Think of the whole package as a giant engine with three main gears. Title 4, which we've been deep diving into, changes the actual rules of the housing system. Title 6 helps finance it through a national infrastructure bank. And Title 8 provides the muscle, expanding our industrial capacity to build modular housing and materials through a strategic public production corporation.
Finally, our last section, Housing of the Future, moving from repair to possibility.
Stepping beyond crisis management, we have some really visionary pilots. First up is the American Union Housing Pilot. This tests standardized, federally owned buildings, 30 to 49 units, that are held permanently outside speculative resale markets. Communities can apply to occupy these durable spaces, completely insulated from market madness.
The Act also commissions a fascinating feasibility study near North Platte, Nebraska. It explores building a purpose-built modern metropolis from scratch. Imagine a central hub for national high-speed rail that seamlessly integrates modular housing, education, closed-loop water, clean energy, and regenerative agriculture.
So, tying this all back to the bigger picture, the Populist Act attacks scarcity and speculation from every single angle. We're looking at fewer homes locked in giant corporate portfolios, a massive renaissance in public housing, abundant supply with real routes to ownership, thriving rural communities, fairer rents, and the sheer capacity to build it all. It's a system that finally works for 100%.
I want to leave you with one final question. What if we actually built a housing system planned for the next century, instead of just desperately patching together the broken pieces of the last one?
In the 21st century, we the people can represent ourselves outside of the two-party system. Visit votewithbrian.com to explore the Populist Act and learn more about the partnership of ordinary people working to transform the 2026 election.